Well, as you know, voter participation in primary elections is notoriously low. Our goal today is to generate enthusiasm for this election that will carry over into the fall. And what we hope to do is we can anticipate that both candidates will want to take their shots at Congressman Fitzpatrick as the incumbent. But I think what we really need to see today is how these two candidates differ from each other. That's the important decision to be made on May 20th, and then subsequent decisions will be made later. Thank you and good afternoon. Welcome to this live audience Democratic primary debate between candidates Kevin Strauss and Shaughnessy Naughton in this, the 8th Congressional District of Pennsylvania. We are proud to have been selected to host this event, and we're determined to have an orderly, well-structured, and meaningful program. We see this forum as a celebration of the democratic process. I want to congratulate the audience here and those watching at home and at our other two campuses for your involvement, and I especially want to congratulate the candidates. There is no higher service individuals can lend to the democratic process than to place their name on a ballot and subject themselves to the scrutiny and rigor of a campaign. And I know there's two people in the room who can testify to that. Regardless of how we view their positions, we owe them our respect and gratitude for contributing to the integrity of our democratic process. Our questions were solicited from faculty, staff, and students from all three of our campuses and reviewed by a committee of faculty and administrators. That's my way of saying, don't shoot the messenger. Time constraints make it impossible to address all of the topics that were suggested, so we opted for depth rather than breadth. We anticipate 8 questions with an optional 9th if time permits. Predictably, the candidates will endeavor to contrast themselves from incumbent Republican Mike Fitzpatrick. No doubt there is a need for that comparison, and we'd like to extend an invitation to the winner of this primary to come back in the fall and debate the congressman. But let's be clear, today is about a democratic primary election, and we are here to discover the differences between candidates Naughton and Strauss and why they feel they are more suited than their primary opponent to challenge the incumbent. You, the listening audience, will be the ultimate judge as to whether or not one of them demonstrates a contrast worthy of your vote on May 20th. A coin toss was used to determine the order of speaking. Each candidate will deliver a 2-minute opening statement. Unless stated otherwise, candidates will also have 2 minutes to respond to each question and a 1-minute rebuttal. I reserve the right to ask a follow-up if, in my judgment, further clarification is warranted. In that case, each candidate will have an additional minute. Candidates, we will display a yellow card. We have Christina Smith here. Christina is going to hold that yellow card up where you can see, and that will tell you you have 30 seconds left. And when she holds the red card up, you're in trouble. You will finish your sentence and complete your comment. This program, we know it's being live streamed by Philly Burbs. You'll be able to watch it later. And we're very pleased with our partnership with the Bucks County Courier-Times to be doing that for us. Regarding audience demeanor, you'll note the papers you found at your seat when you arrived. The candidates join me in asking you that you refrain from noise, applause, or outbursts of any kind, except right now as you welcome them to the stage. Would you guys like to shake hands?
Oh, sure.
We'll begin with our opening statements. We have our timekeeper ready, and Kevin Strauss, by virtue of the coin toss, will go first.
First of all, let me say thank you very much, both to Bill for putting this together, to the college for having us, and I'm particularly pleased to know that there are students here from Truman and from Salisbury School. It's great to be here today. I'm Kevin Strauss, and I am running for Congress in Pennsylvania's 8th Congressional District. And since this is the first time meeting a number of you, I wanted to take a minute to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm running for Congress because I'm worried about the country I'm raising my children in. My grandfather, Leo, was able to raise a family of 4 in Northeast Philadelphia, working as a custodian because he was in a union and he made a livable wage. My mother was the first person in her family to go to college, and she put herself through school working as a waitress. Because of their hard work, I had opportunity available to me. And so when it came my turn, after I had gone through Pennsylvania's public schools, after I graduated college, I wanted to give something back because my family had that American experience where if you work hard, there's opportunity. So I enlisted in the military. Now, when I get involved in something, I go all in. When I see a problem, I take it head on, and I try to put myself on the front lines. So when I joined the military, I joined the Army Rangers, the toughest unit in the Army. I deployed to Afghanistan 3 times, I deployed to Iraq once, but I was proud to do it. And from there, I went and volunteered for the Central Intelligence Agency, where I worked in the Counterterrorism Center for 6 years because I wanted to be at the tip of the spear keeping this country safe. Well, now I work for an educational not-for-profit called Teach to Serve, and we work with high school students in the region, teach them about social entrepreneurship so they can become the community leaders of the future. So as you can see, I've always gone to where I see the biggest challenges facing this country, facing this community. And our biggest challenge right now is Congress. And I've shown that I'm willing to put country and I'm willing to put community ahead of myself. And that's the experience and that's the approach that I intend to take down to Washington. Thank you all so much again for having us here today. I'm delighted to be here.
All right, we'll let you clap after Shaughnessy's also, and then that's going to be it for the clapping until the end of the debate. Shaughnessy?
Thank you, Bill, and thank you all for coming out today. My name is Shaughnessy Naughton, and I'm running to replace Mike Fitzpatrick this year. I'm a scientist by training and a small business owner, and those are 2 perspectives I think we can use in Washington today. I'm born and raised in Bucks County and earned my degree in chemistry, and I worked in breast cancer research and drug discovery. And then about 10 years ago, my family's business was in trouble. And although I had gone to college to not go in the family business, I stepped in to turn things around. And one of the most important things it's taught me is the balance that we need to have between short-term sacrifice and long-term gain and growth. And frankly, not enough folks are thinking long-term in Washington today. And we see it as we move from crisis to crisis with nothing getting done to actually move the country forward and rebuild the path to prosperity. And we know how to do it. We need to be investing in infrastructure now to get people back to work and get the economy going, and then thinking long term, making education the priority it needs to be so that we can have the qualified workforce for tomorrow, and investing in science and technology so we can grow and create the jobs and industries of tomorrow. If we're going to unseat an incumbent like Mike Fitzpatrick, we need to present a stark contrast. And my background as a scientist and a small business owner and a woman does that, as well as brings a unique perspective that we could use in Washington today. And so I thank you all for coming out today. I thank you for posing your questions, and I ask you for your support.
Okay, you have it out of your system now, right? Okay. First question goes to Kevin Strauss. This is a 3-part question, so you might want to take your pencil out.
I feel like I'm back in school.
The current makeup of the House of Representatives gives the Republicans a better than 30-vote edge. Given the political landscape, it is almost a certainty that if you are elected, you will be a member of the minority party. Part 1, explain how you can be effective in that environment. Part 2, presidents are rarely as popular in their second term as they are in their first. How do you gauge the president's popularity in Bucks County at this time? And are you prepared today to invite President Barack Obama to visit Bucks County in your behalf during the fall campaign if you win the primary? And finally, if elected, will you support Nancy Pelosi for House Minority Leader, or do you feel Democrats could benefit from a change in party leadership?
Well, I'll tell you, the first question, I think is the fundamental question about how, if I stand up here, better? Okay, sorry, I was getting a sound check there. If I stand up here and tell you, make all these promises, these things that I want to do, but I can't come through and it doesn't really do anyone any good. But I will tell you, there is a potential for improved performance coming from Congress. And what our representatives need to do is we need to focus on the issues where we have shared agreements, if you want to get some stuff done. I'm not talking about sacrificing our principles, but I'll give you 2 examples where we can do more together. First, which is personally important to me as a veteran, is veterans issues. We know that our government right now is not doing its veterans right. The people coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq, where you have 22 veterans a day who are committing suicide, and you have a backlog with the VA that in some cases goes well more than a year. Republicans and Democrats understand we can do better there, and that is one area where we can work together. Second area is small business. Everyone loves small business, Democrats, Republicans. Now, I'm not saying we stop there, but you use that as an initial step. You use that as an opportunity to start building trust, start getting some things done. Because passing laws is not just about being right and wrong, it's about building these relationships, putting this time in. This is the kind of work that I used to do in the Central Intelligence Agency. We would get questions sometimes directly from the president where there were profound disagreements. But we managed to work together, we managed to get the job done because we had no other choice. And that's the problem with this Congress. It acts as if there's a choice, like these crises aren't approaching, and it refuses to do anything about it. But we work together, I would take a leadership role if need be, and we get the job done. And I received awards for it. So that's the kind of experience I intend to take to Congress.
Ms. Naughton?
Okay. I think the way that we address these problems and the fact that nothing's getting done in Congress is the same way you would address things in a research lab. You collaborate and you find what you want the solution to be and work backwards. I think there's a lot more that we would find that we agree on than we disagree. And right now, that's just not happening. And the only way we're going to change that is we change the type of people representing us in Washington. As a small business owner, I don't always agree with my business partner, who also happens to be my brother. But we still, at the end of the day, we get the job done because we have clients relying on us. And it's the same thing in Congress. We are suffering because they're not doing their job. We could pass an infrastructure bill that would actually get people back to work, but it's not happening. And why isn't it happening? The infrastructure was never a partisan issue. Even raising the minimum wage. 75% of Americans believe we should raise the minimum wage, yet it's stalled in the House of Representatives. And Mike Fitzpatrick's a part of that. So I think it's critically important that we change the type of people that are representing us, and we bring a practical and common sense approach to governing.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you both again. Would you invite President Barack Obama to campaign for you in Bucks County if you receive the nomination, and will you vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker of the House, or excuse me, for Minority Leader, or do you think it changes in order?
Yeah, Bill, and I took the first 2 minutes to respond to the first question just because I thought it was the most important. With respect to the second question, sure, there's an open invitation for the president to come through here. He's our president. He's the president of these United States, and he was democratically elected and supported by the majority of Pennsylvanians as well as in the country. And I'm proud to have him as our president. Doesn't mean he's perfect, doesn't mean he's done everything well, but he is our president. As far as Nancy Pelosi becoming Speaker, look, I'll tell you right now, I'm not looking past November, and that's where my focus is right now, is getting towards November. And when it comes to electing Speaker, I will make the decisions, whether it's for this or any other decision, guided by what I think is best for the community and for this country.
Ms. Naughton?
Yes, I would be honored if the president came to Bucks County. And I do think it's important that we whether we agree on every issue or not, that we do support the president, especially with all the international problems that we're facing right now. We shouldn't be divided on international issues. So I think that's critically important. As far as who is going to run for minority or preferably majority leader, I don't think we know that. I think Nancy Pelosi was effective in passing legislation as the first woman majority leader. So she does have a proven track record, but I don't know what her intentions are in the fall.
Okay, thank you. Can we skip the rebuttal? I think we're good for this one. And Let me go on record saying I think Bucks County Community College would welcome President Barack Obama to stand here and visit as well, okay? Okay.
He's probably watching right now.
Question number 2. Question number 2 is for Ms. Naughton. The Affordable Health Care Act is clearly one of the most dramatic, controversial, and perhaps misrepresented pieces of domestic legislation since Medicare. If elected, would you be inclined to repeal it, to reform it, or to reaffirm it?
The Affordable Health Care Act is a good first step. When Medicare was launched, there was an entire scare campaign that was also launched that said, this is government takeover of healthcare, and this is government getting between you and your doctor. Sound familiar? The Affordable Health Care Act is a step in bringing more people into having accessible health insurance. Prior to it, you could lose your health insurance for getting sick. I mean, there's a lot of consumer protection built into this bill, which is why I think it's important that we push forward with it. On my own personal story, I grew up, I didn't have health insurance growing up, and 10 years ago, my mother was getting up in age, and I tried to go out and buy private health insurance for her. And even with a high deductible, it was completely unaffordable because of her age. And so at 65, we got her signed up for Medicare, and a few years later she had a stroke. And she had a stroke because she had undiagnosed high blood pressure, because she hadn't seen a doctor in 20 years. And that's the story of too many Americans, and that can't happen anymore because of the Affordable Care Act. So I think it's critically important that we remind our friends and neighbors of the consumer protections built into this bill, that you students can stay on your parents' health insurance plans until you're 26 years old, that women are no longer discriminated against because they're women and used to have to pay higher premiums. So I think it's a good first step. It doesn't do enough to address the rising cost in healthcare, but it's a good first step.
Thank you. Mr. Strauss?
Yeah, there's no question that when the Affordable Care Act was rolled out, there were significant issues, and Kathleen Sebelius admitted as much this weekend. Particularly to let a website go out and the condition it was in, to me, represents a total lack of accountability. But that said, let's remember what we're doing here. We're bringing health care to people who didn't have it, and at last count, of more than 9 million Americans. And the system we have now is certainly better than where we were. In the course of my campaign, I've gotten to know a lot of people, and someone who's become a friend, her name is Julia from Doylestown. And Julia told me a story that a few years ago, before the ACA came out, her mother had to get tested for the breast cancer gene. And she paid for it under the table because she knew that if she tested positive, not only would she lose her health insurance, but her two children would as well. That's where we came from. That's not acceptable in the United States of America. So that's why I understand the concerns about the Affordable Care Act. But my view is we should stop playing politics with people's health, and we should start working together to make it work for all Americans.
1 minute rebuttal.
Again, I think the consumer protections built into this bill can't be emphasized enough. People with pre-existing conditions can no longer be discriminated against. That's a good thing. I have a friend who is a 60-year-old waitress, who works hard, but really doesn't make enough to pay a $1,200 a month health insurance premium. And she had been paying into the high-risk pool by the Pennsylvania High-Risk Insurance Pool until Corbett canceled the program. And for the last 3 years, she's had no health insurance because of that. Well, now under the Affordable Care Act, she has health insurance, and it is affordable. And that's a good thing for all of us because it means less people are relying on emergency services and are able to access preventive care.
Thank you. Mr. Strauss?
Yeah, the only other thing I'd like to add is, well, the first is, no matter what a bill is, if I object to it, one thing I'm not going to do is vote to repeal it 50 times, because that is completely ineffective. And it's just theater. And we're playing politics with people's health. Now, as I said, there are a couple legitimate concerns, and certainly the rising cost of health inflation in this country is a problem. But I say we can work together. And the two proposals that I'd offer, the first is we ought to be introducing technology into healthcare. And the second thing is, and probably the more important, we need to reorient our healthcare system so that it pays for outcomes rather than merely paying for services. Now, there are programs over at CMS. These programs are scalable, and we can work together and make the system work better for everybody.
Okay, question number 3. This is going to sound like a ho-hum question, but you know, the problem is there and we just don't hear solutions. So today we're going to hear them. And it's to Mr. Strauss first. In recent years, the middle class has declined in purchasing power, share of national income, and several other economic indicators. What specific things would you do to strengthen the economic future of the middle class? And I want to emphasize specific.
The only thing that surprises me is that you called it a ho-hum question, because this is fundamental to what's happening in this country right now. And if you look at how our business cycle is changing, they're selling to two groups of people, the very rich and the very poor, because the middle class in this country is shrinking. Now, in terms of what steps can we take to start rebuilding the middle class, well, I look at it, we have to invest in two primary areas. The first, and it's particularly suitable given this audience, is through our education systems. Now, for me personally, I have two very young children. I have a 3.5-year-old son, Wally, and a 2-year-old daughter, Charlotte. And they go to a pre-K school right now over in Langhorne. And their little brains are sponges, and to see how much they learn, they're gonna go to kindergarten and be very prepared, and every student they go to kindergarten with should have that opportunity. And same thing, again, from the federal perspective, coming out of high school, having that opportunity to get an advanced education, whether it's a liberal arts education or whether it's a trade education, making sure that those Pell Grants or other sort of scholarships are available for students so they can pursue their dreams and join the middle class. So that's one. The second piece is, I'd also like to see us, we need to start investing in our infrastructure. Now, we just came over from Bristol Borough this afternoon, but I hit at least half a dozen potholes. And we can't expect to have a first world country if we don't have a first world infrastructure. That's our roads, that's our bridges, which, by the way, in Pennsylvania, they're among the worst in the country. It's also our electricity grid. Make this a great place to do business. And then the final leg of this three-legged stool that I'd highlight is, we do need to identify areas where we can cut red tape, find inefficient or duplicative regulations, and make it easier to start and grow small businesses. Most economists in this country will tell you that small business is the largest net job creator in the country. So we need to make it easier for people to start and grow their businesses.
Thank you. Ms. Naughton?
It does start with education. We need to have universal preschool education. We know this is the best way to have an educated populace, and then making sure that we make post-secondary education affordable. Right now, the federal government essentially, or the Reserve, loans money to banks at 0%. And we loan money to students at 7%. That doesn't make sense. And that's something that Congress decides, and that's something that Mike Fitzpatrick voted to raise the rates on student loans. We can do better than that, and that is the clearest path to the middle class, is through quality public education, and then a university or technical degree after. 2, we need to reform our tax policy. Right now, our corporate tax policy essentially encourages large corporations to keep profits and investments overseas rather than investing them back here in the United States so we can grow and create jobs here in the United States. The proposal I would make is that we make an Apollo-type program for energy to create jobs and industries here, jobs that can't be exported. When JFK said we were going to get to the moon in 10 years, we did it in 8, and we created 400,000 direct jobs and millions of ancillary jobs. We could be doing that today with energy, so we would pivot away from the dirty fuels of the past and create the jobs and new technologies of the future, similar to how we did with the Apollo program. And I think that's critical to our future success.
Rebuttal, Mr. Strauss?
Yeah, the only other thing I'd add, and you know, we're all talking about the middle class here, so I want to be careful with my words, but I do see as one of the steps to the path of the middle class is raising the minimum wage. Because right now, if you work 2 full-time jobs at minimum wage, you cannot raise a family. You can't. You'll be in poverty. And how can you expect a person or a family to get ahead, to lift themselves up, if they are stuck at that wage level? So that's one of the reasons why I'm a firm supporter and believer in the minimum wage. And if you look in the past when we've raised it, there's been net job creation. That's what the data show, and that's why I support the policy.
Ms. Naughton?
We have seen the purchasing power of the middle class eroded, and a lot of that has come through because of wage stagnation. And we've essentially seen 10, 12 years of wage stagnation in this country. And it goes back to we need to have a fairer tax system so that everyone pays their fair share and we create growth and jobs here in the United States. We can't continue to see the downward pressure on wages that we've seen if we're going to have a prosperous middle class.
Thank you. Question number 4 is directed at Ms. Naughton. You've been criticized for running for office with virtually no prior government experience. Mr. Strauss, you've been criticized for only recently moving into the district and that you're not fully in touch with Bucks County voters. How do each of you respond to these criticisms? First.
Well, my first question would be what has Mike Fitzpatrick accomplished for us with all his years in government? I think it's time for a change, and I think it's time for a fresh perspective, which is what I bring. The tired old policies that we've heard out of Washington are getting us nowhere. 52 votes to take away affordable health care for Americans is getting us nowhere. We need a new perspective. I am a scientist and a small business owner. And as a small business owner, I've created those jobs that we like to hear politicians talk so much about. And I've purchased health plans for my employees. And I've balanced budgets and payrolls. And I think those are good skills to have in Washington. Now, I don't think the government should be run like a business, but I do think there are skills from the private sector that can be taken and applied to increase efficiency and transparency and to bring new ideas. As a small business owner, if you don't constantly create and innovate, you're not going to be around. And that's what I've done for over 10 years. And that's the type of skills I would bring to Washington. The idea that you need to have run for office in order to run for office sounds a little silly to me.
Thank you. Mr. Strauss?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I appreciate having the opportunity to address it. Look, let me start by explaining why I'm here. We moved here because we love it here. My wife and I are here with our 2 young children that I already mentioned, and when we came back to Pennsylvania, we had 3 criteria. The first was we have great schools to send our children to. Second was to have great neighborhoods to raise our kids. And the third was to be near family, and this is actually the first time in my entire life I've been within less than an hour of my entire family. And we're so thrilled to be here. Now, the other part, let me just answer, is where I've been. Now, I mentioned I was in the Army. I went from college, joined the Army. They sent me to Fort Lewis, Washington. Then from there, I joined the Central Intelligence Agency. I was based primarily out of Langley, Virginia. This is the first time in my life, in my adult life at least, that I've had the opportunity to pick where I wanted to live. And I chose here. And we're so happy to be here. Now, in terms of why I am qualified to run for Congress, all right, I haven't run for elected office either. But I did spend the better part of 8 years in the Central Intelligence Agency, where, as I mentioned, we worked on policy. And you understand the nuances of how policy is made, how the executive branch works with Congress, and we worked on the toughest policy issues facing this country. And quite frequently, there were a number of profound differences because some of these questions we were being asked, these were life and death issues. But we worked together and we got the job done. And that's exactly what's missing from this Congress, who refuses to do anything because they say it's too hard, or they finger point, or they blame one another. That attitude doesn't fly, and that is why we have an ineffective Congress. And I think my experience will make me a much stronger congressman than what's currently there.
Women make up 51% of the population, yet we only have 20% of the representation in Congress. In Pennsylvania, we have 1 congresswoman, and she's stepping down. Now, I'm not saying you should vote for me because I'm a woman, but I do think that we bring a different perspective. And we saw that in the government shutdown, where women really led the way out of that. And it's because they were willing to sit down and compromise and hash out a deal. And that's what we need more of in Washington. We don't need more of the tired old politics of Mike Fitzpatrick.
I'm good.
You good with? Okay. I'm going to change question 5. Question 5 was on the economy, and I think the candidates have been weaving in economic comments all along and can continue to do so. So let me shift it to government reform, specifically congressional reform. We can talk about campaign finance. We can talk about the process for congressional redistricting. We can talk about all kinds of things. What would you like to see done differently to fix what many people feel is a broken Washington and a broken Congress? And that goes to Mr. Strauss first.
So the question is on congressional reform.
Congressional
Where would
reform.
we start? You know, I actually think the first place, there's so much. So it's, you know, it's sort of tough to answer the question. Campaign finance reform is a huge problem, and we need to figure out a way to reduce the influence of money, particularly special interest in Congress. But I'll tell you one thing where I think we really ought to focus on, and that's the gerrymandering that's going on in this country. And frankly, both parties are guilty of it. Now, in Pennsylvania, specifically, it's hurt the Democrats a hell of a lot more, where you have 18 seats, and 5 of them are occupied by Democrats because of how these districts are drawn. Now, one pitch I will make, this is a good reminder for everybody to make sure you get out and vote for your state rep candidates and your state senate candidates, because they're the folks who actually draw these lines. But if there were a way that we could do away with gerrymandering in this country, you'd also have much less an issue where people talk about putting term limits on, because they'd be self-term limit, because the voters would actually have an opportunity to speak. But there are far too many people in this country and in this state whose votes don't matter. So the one thought I will leave you all with is you are lucky because you are in an area where your vote does matter. So I do encourage everybody, whether you're physically here or watching live, to get out and vote this May and this November, because this is your vote. Remember that people well before you have fought for your right to vote, and it is critically important to our democracy that you all participate.
I also agree that gerrymandering is the #1 problem. There were 5 million more votes cast in the 2012 elections for Democratic House candidates than Republicans, yet Republicans maintain the control of the House of Representatives because of these gerrymandered districts. But that's not something I'm going to be able to do on the federal level. On the federal level, what we can encourage, especially, and make sure that we're doing our best, is to encourage people to get out to vote. There's been a lot of talk, excuse me.
We won't take a sip, we won't count. Stop the clock, Christina.
There's been a lot of talk about how much power and influence the 1% have. But the 1% only get 1% of the vote. It's the 99% of us that need to make sure we're getting out there and voting. As far as special interest money, I think that this is something that we should be pursuing in Congress. We do have a First Amendment. Everybody has a right to voice their opinions, especially to their legislators. But we don't need to have this revolving door that we see in Congress of staff and members going from the House floor to K Street. And we see way too much of that, and the effects of it are felt by all of us. So I think that we need to be working in a bipartisan fashion to make sure to limit the amount of influence that lobbyists have while maintaining our rights to speak with our legislators.
Let me ask a follow-up, and you can use your additional minute any way you like, okay? The fastest growing political group in America is not the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. It is the growing number of independents, people registering as independent. And of course, they are precluded, at least in Pennsylvania, from voting in any primary elections, which causes both parties to nominate people who are closer to the fringe rather than the center of the political spectrum. And I know that's in the hands of the state legislature and not in your hands, but I'd just like to know philosophically, would you favor an open primary system in Pennsylvania that would allow independents to vote by choosing the party of their choice in the primary where they like to cast that vote? And so we'll keep the same order. Mr. Strauss first.
You know, yeah. I mean, it's something I admit I haven't really thought about because it's not a federal issue. But I do think anything we can do, I mean, the broader principle we're supporting here, anything we can do to get more people involved in our political process early on, I think is a good thing. Now, if indeed the independent party or independents are growing in terms of being the largest party, maybe at some point they'll start running their own candidates as well, and they can get involved in the political system that way. But in the meantime, I support any effort that helps bring more people into the political process.
Thank you. Ms. Naughton?
I think a lot of us out there like to vote for the best candidate, regardless of party. And I don't think it should just be limited to independents. I mean, if we had open primaries, we would have a much more democratic, small d, and a much more moderate legislators. If everyone could just choose the best candidate, you wouldn't be seeing these extreme people, especially on the you wouldn't be seeing as extreme discussion going on in government and just the gridlock that results from that.
Thank you. Any other comments on that? That's good?
We're good.
Okay. Question 6, and this is for Ms. Naughton first. In a democratic society, we seek the proper balance between protecting civil liberties on the one hand and ensuring national security on the other. What is your perspective with regard to the ongoing disclosures about NSA activities?
Well, I think we would all agree that there's been an overreach by the NSA and that it's gone too far. We don't need to be giving up our civil liberties to have national security. That's clearly stated in the Constitution, and we should all make sure to remember that. We've had crises before, whether it was communism or prior threats. Yet we always seem to be able to maintain the integrity of our Constitution, and that shouldn't change today. The ongoing abuses that we've heard out of the NSA and frankly the CIA are not part of our American values. We don't need to be spying on Americans. We shouldn't be assassinating Americans overseas. This is wrong, and this is a problem for our democracy.
Mr. Strauss?
Yeah, the first thing I'll tell you, I mean, having had what I would consider the honor of working with people in the Central Intelligence Agency and having to interact with a lot of folks over at the National Security Agency for the better part of 8 years, I will tell you that they're fantastic Americans. And they work in the shadows, they put their lives at risk because they believe in the country. And I didn't meet a single person who joined up because they wanted to spy on Americans. Now, with that said, I think in the wake of 9/11, our government collectively went a little too far. And we permitted some things to happen that we shouldn't have. I have had the opportunity to read some of the president's recommendations, and with my own personal spin on it, I mean, my recommendation would be a couple things. The first is we need to introduce a civil liberties advocate into the FISA court. Right now, that doesn't exist. Now, the trick there is going to be making sure that person is actually empowered to be a legitimate defender of civil rights as opposed to just another stooge for the executive branch. So that's one. And the second thing is with the National Security Letters Program. And I realize it's a little bit abstruse, but what I'm talking about is right now, the government can go to something like Verizon and say, I need to see all the information that you have on your phone number. And they have to hand it over without any judge or any sort of or justice advocate looking at it. There's no reason you would not harm national security to introduce some sort of judge to look at that information before they actually process it. It's an easy step. I mean, ultimately, if you consider that the foundation of the American justice system is the adversarial system. So if you sue me, you get a lawyer, I get a lawyer, we hash it out in court. That doesn't exist in the intelligence community right now. And I'm certain we can introduce those principles into the intelligence community so that we can stay safe, but we can also stay free.
Thank you. Ms. Naughton?
We have seen a general abdication by Congress since September 11th, and that was a reaction to September 11th, but I think we need to move past that and make sure that Congress is doing its job. It's Congress's job to decide when we go to war, and it's not the executive branch's job. We need to make sure that our court system is allowed to do its own job of deciding who is and is not guilty. That shouldn't be decided by drone strikes that we see going on right now. So I think it's critically important that Congress take back its role in deciding where and when our country is going to get involved overseas.
I'm going to ask a follow-up question to that, if I may. For most of us in the room, 9/11 is indelibly seared in our psyche. But the students I teach are often 19 years old. They were 6 or so when the World Trade Center came down. Can you take a minute each to talk to them about the world we exist in today, the terror threat, in the context of the time, perhaps we overreacted with our use of NSA agencies such as that to, quote, keep us safe. Is there a danger we go too far the other way as we forget? Can you talk to the young people in the room about that?
Yeah, I mean, very quickly, and I'm going to try and do this and make it through it. I was in boot camp when 9/11 happened, and I thought, I went to college in New York City, and I thought my friends had been killed. And I remember getting the call, and they lined us all up, and they explained what happened. And obviously, it still, deeply affects me today, and it has, driven a lot of what I've done since I was in the military. And it's one of the reasons, in addition to what I told you about my family, about why I serve this country. When you're dealing with topics that are this emotional, the temptation to overreact is there, and we clearly did it. And use it as a learning experience. We can't forget our core principles. Remember, that's what makes this country great, is that we respect civil liberties, we respect individual rights. And that's why over the long run, our democracy will survive over these other forms of government. And that's why I served in the military, and that's why I served in the Central Intelligence Agency. But I understand that there are limits.
I was overseas when September 11th hit, and the last thing I had done prior to leaving was I had taken, for my niece, Flat Stanley around New York City, and I had taken him to the the World Trade Center to take a picture for her. And then I left, and I remember, hearing in a foreign tongue about what was happening in New York. And I have a lot of friends and family in New York, and it was terrifying because it was something that we'd never had happen in the United States before, and especially not at that level. And I remember thinking, no, you mean in Chicago, not New York. It couldn't happen. And it did. But it didn't happen because we didn't have the information. It happened because we weren't looking through the information and finding the facts that were there. So we need to remember that we don't need mass spying on Americans to be safe. We need to be smart about our intelligence.
Thank you. Follow-ups? We good?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit of an overstatement to say that people weren't doing their jobs, and that's why 9/11 happened.
I apologize. I did not mean to imply that no one was doing their job, but there definitely was a lack of assembling all the information that was available.
And this is typical Congress, where whenever something goes wrong, they tend to blame the intelligence community for policy failures. So, I mean, this is exactly what we dealt with in the Central Intelligence Agency all the time, where every time something went wrong, they'd start beating up on us. So, and this is how Congress has been. So it's disappointing to hear it here as well.
I think it's good for people to accept responsibility, and I think we have seen an acceptance of responsibility by the intelligence agencies that there was a failure, otherwise it wouldn't have happened.
Thank you. Okay, question 7. This is for Mr. Strauss. We have 3 questions left. So far, we have not had I knew John Kennedy, I worked with John Kennedy, and believe me, Senator, you're no John Kennedy, but who knows, maybe we'll get lucky in the last couple, right? This is a rapid-fire question. I'm going to ask you a series of social issues. You can use your time to respond to any or all of them, okay? Would you share your view on abortion, government-mandated birth control insurance coverage, legalization of marijuana, gay marriage, gun control, or any other social issue I haven't mentioned? Let's give you a minute to gather your thoughts,
All right.
okay? Let me repeat it, so you can both...
And who's first?
Abortion, and you are first. Abortion, government-mandated birth control insurance coverage, legalization of marijuana, gay marriage, gun control, or any other social issue?
I mean, when it comes to most social issues, I'll state the principle pretty clearly. I don't like the government getting involved in my conversations with my doctor. And I certainly don't want the government getting involved in my daughter's conversations with her doctor as she grows up. So for that reason, I'm a pro-choice candidate. Similarly, let me talk about marriage equality for a second. I do support marriage equality. And it is a little personal to me. So my wife and I got married in 2008, right? And we had been together for about 3 years. And at our wedding, we had two friends attend, Patricia and Jean. And Jean had helped raise Amy, my wife, when she was a little kid. She'd babysat for her. Well, they've been together for over 30 years. So here were my wife and I, been together for 3 years, getting married. And here were Patricia and Jean, had been together for 30 years, not allowed to get married. I don't think the government should be telling two people who have shown that they love each other and are committed to each other that they can't get married, that their relationship is viewed in a different way. So that's why I support marriage equality.
Shaughnessy?
I definitely do not think we need government getting in between women and their doctors. And it's kind of unbelievable to me that we're still even talking about birth control and access to birth control. This is, I think for most of us, we thought this was settled a long time ago, and frankly, it should have been, because it's not a place that, it just doesn't make sense. And regarding abortion, I think we do need to let people make their own personal decisions. That's part of the foundation of our country, is that we do allow personal freedoms. Regarding gun control, I think we have to remember that a lot of gun owners are responsible gun owners. I grew up in Bucks County in Plumstead Township, and there are a lot of hunters there, and they're not the problem. The problem are illegal handguns and the violence that is causing, especially in inner city communities. And what are we going to do about illegal handguns? I think some of the legislation we've seen out of Pennsylvania, which requires people to report lost and stolen handguns, is common sense and makes sense and will help to cut down on the gun violence that we see. One of the things that doesn't get talked about enough regarding gun violence are the 20,000 suicides a year that are caused by handguns, and what we could be doing about that. The Affordable Health Care Act does help bring greater parity to mental health services, which I think is a good step. But I also think having some common sense laws or regulations on responsibly storing handguns could help with that as well.
Thank you. Another minute, Kevin?
Yeah, I wanted to sort of allow a transition. So the only other topic I'll touch on very briefly is marijuana. And for me, it's not just a matter of decriminalizing marijuana, which is actually a position I support. I think it allows us to talk about the more important issue, which is a broader overhaul of our criminal justice system in this country. Because right now we are throwing way too many young men and young women into prison for nonviolent crimes for a long time. And they go to those prisons, and that's where they learn how to become violent offenders. And then we wonder why they get out and the recidivism rate is higher. So I would support, in addition to decriminalizing marijuana, a complete overhaul of our criminal justice system to make it much more sensible and deal with nonviolent offenders in a dramatically different way.
I support marriage equality. I grew up in New Hope, and it's something that we've worked for a long time, and I'm glad to see that the country's finally there. I'm sorry to see that our congressman is not, but we are making progress with that. My sister-in-laws are a gay couple, and last year, they live in Montgomery County. When Montgomery County started to allow gay marriage, their children, who are teenagers now, were very excited about their moms to be able to actually get married. And I think that puts a very human touch to this story, that more people need to realize that this is a human rights issue, that everyone should have the right to get married.
Thank you. Question number 8, and this is going to be directed to Ms. Naughton first. To paraphrase Sarah Palin or Tina Fey, take your pick,
I woke everyone up.
Vladimir Putin has reared his head in a most unwelcome way in Ukraine. As a matter of fact, news reports this morning indicate that a Soviet plane, I'm sorry, I'm dating myself, a Russian plane does, well, 60's the new 40, so don't. A Russian plane buzzed an American warship 12 times. What should or could the Obama administration have done in response to Russia's annexation of Crimea? And in a broader sense, what should America's mission in the world be as we withdraw from 2 long and costly wars in Afghanistan and Iraq?
Well, we have to maintain our position as a world leader. And we do that not just by engaging with our friends and allies, but also by talking with our enemies. Right now, there is a lot going on in the world. In Syria, there's a tremendous humanitarian crisis along with the civil war. And we have been making some progress on making sure that we get chemical weapons out of Assad's hands so he can't use them on his people. And we've done that by talking with Vladimir Putin and talking with the Russians and Iranians to make sure that we can secure those weapons and get them out of Syria. I think that that's critically important for our future as a country to remember, and maybe this goes to Congress as well, that you talk to your friends, but you also have to engage your enemies. With Russia, it's an incredibly complicated situation. And I think that we've seen over the last couple of years, whether it was Syria and the rush for us to get involved there, not pursuing a diplomatic option, or with the Iranians right now, with negotiating how we're going to prevent them from getting nuclear weapons. What we've seen, though, is that patience and diplomacy is what has worked the best, and that's what we need to pursue with Russia as well.
Thank you. Kevin?
Let me start with the broader principle here, and you know, even in light of being in 2 wars for the better part of the last, I guess, 13 years now, I still believe in a robust U.S. foreign policy. Now, that doesn't mean leading with our military. I don't want any of you to have to go to war or have to get sent overseas away from your family. I certainly don't want my kids to do that. But I do believe in a robust foreign policy. I do believe America should stay engaged in the world. And that's both through bilateral relationships with our friends and allies, as well as through multilateral institutions, whether it's the UN or NATO. You know, since the first question was specifically about Ukraine, you know, I'll make a comment, and it's, you know, it is a bit of a criticism with the president, because I do feel like he's pulled back a bit in our engagement in the world. And I think with Ukraine, we had an opportunity to maybe get involved a little bit earlier working with our allies, and we didn't do as much. But you know, even in light of what's going on there now with the violence, we need to make sure we're still working through our friends and allies. So whether that's with the EU and specifically with NATO, that's obviously the first step. Certainly Russia needs to be bounced right out of the G8. But there is one other opportunity that I see here. And you know, most of us know that the president pivoted from the Middle East to East Asia because of China. Well, this does actually lend us an opportunity to build some trust, to build some relationships with China, because they're not pleased with how Russia's handled this situation. Because China, like us, doesn't like when other countries invade, you know, just for their personal gain, which is what Russia's doing. So this is something where I think we can start working together with the Chinese, and you start to build those trusts. Because whether we like it or not, the Chinese are going to be competitors of ours in East Asia for a long time. So we're going to have to learn to work together, and I think this is a good place to start.
Once again, going back to Syria, I think we could be doing more to help the humanitarian crisis. But if you think about what's going on there, we don't have an alternative to Assad at this point. And we've seen what happens when we engage militarily in the Middle East. We don't have a very good track record. So I think that pursuing a diplomatic path, working to organize the refugees, to show them how to set up a democracy so that there is one in place when Assad does eventually fall, which I think he will, and making sure that we have a reliable democratic government to be able to step in when that does happen.
I think I'm good unless you have a follow-up
Okay.
question.
Okay, thank you. The last question. One of the pearls of being a moderator is that as soon as the debate is over, 50 people rush up to you and say, you should have said this, you should have asked them that. I'm not going to stand for that, so I'm going to trick the two candidates. And we're going to start with Kevin. Please identify a question you wish was asked and was not, and then answer it yourself.
Can we take one from the audience?
No.
A question that I wish I was asked. Bill, you stumped me.
I'll tell you what, why don't you both take a minute, and let me make some procedural comments, and then we'll come back, okay?
Okay.
See? You see what it's like when someone comes up to you and says, you should have asked that, or?
I'm ready.
Okay.
I yield the floor.
The League of Women Voters are in the lobby to register individuals to vote today. And if nothing else comes out of today, if we get more people, especially young people who may not be registered, to take a minute, and that's all it takes, to fill out the card and register to vote so you can vote in this election, it would be very good. The last day to register is April 21st, so don't procrastinate. Do it today. The last day to request an absentee ballot is May 13th, and of course, Election Day is May 20th. In addition, staffers from both campaigns are in the lobby and will be distributing campaign materials and soliciting support for their campaigns. We also encourage students and community members to get involved by volunteering for the candidate of your choice, regardless of party. Congressman Fitzpatrick was also invited to set up a table. He chose not to in deference to the candidates. He said it's their day, and we respect that. I supervise the political science student internship program at the college, and we're proud of the experiences that students have gained by working for candidates and in political offices in the past. So we want to encourage students to get involved in any way they see fit. That's it. Let's go to the question.
Well, I want to take a minute to talk about energy because I know there have been some questions, about where I stand on energy. So let me state up front that I do believe in global warming and I do believe in man-made climate change, and I view it as a threat, both near-term and long-term, to our national security, certainly our environment. And there is nothing more important to me than making sure my kids have clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, and that I know when I'm giving them a bath at night that I'm not slowly poisoning them. We need to start moving away from our addiction to hydrocarbons in this country. We've been talking about it for a long time, but we're not taking the steps that we need to be taking to do that. And as first thought, right now, if you look at how the investment cycle works with green energy and with hydrocarbons, if you're oil or gas, you'll get your subsidy for the better part of 10 years. Well, if you're the Gamesa plant over in Fairless Hills, which makes wind turbines and which has been shedding jobs for the last couple of years, you're only finding out last minute the investment cycle is 1 to 2 years if Congress decides to pass their tax credit, and they just did this again at the end of last year. So we need to bring those two sources of energy in terms of the investment cycle onto an even plane. Because I will tell you, if we do that, you will see much more of our energy consumption come through renewables, and that's critically important. The last story I'll tell you very briefly, the military recognized this in Iraq. They were losing soldiers because they had to move fuel to their outposts, their isolated outposts in the desert, whether it was Iraq or Afghanistan. But the Marines in Iraq, they started providing things like solar tents. They could power their radios, power their batteries, and it reduced their energy consumption, or at least their consumption of gas dramatically. And when the Marine headquarters came to take those solar tents away from their soldiers, their outposts, they said no, because this is what's saving our troops' lives. We refuse to let you take them. So the military has recognized this, and now we need the rest of the country to do the same thing.
Thank you.
So do you support a federal ban on fracking in the Delaware River Basin? And my answer is yes, definitively, consistently from the beginning. The reason why is we have 15 million people dependent on the water supply in the Delaware River Basin. We can't afford to put that at risk. We have currently fracking is not under the Clean Water Safety Act. We need to make sure to get that under the Clean Water Safety Act, which is something I would push for in Congress, along with the federal ban. Right now we have a state and a federal moratorium, which could essentially be lifted at any time, putting our public health and water at risk. We've seen studies, recently studies out of Princeton University, showing that infants born within a 1.5 mile radius of drill sites in Pennsylvania had higher rates of lower birth weights and higher rates of lower APGAR scores. You bring fracking into a densely populated area like Bucks and Montgomery counties, that's going to affect tremendously more people, and it's why we can't have it. I grew up on the Delaware River, and my mother, when I was a child, used to go out and protest Dump the Pump, and sometimes get arrested. But one of the things it taught me is that that she stood up for what she believed in. And it's shaped who I am, and it's why I have been clear and consistent that we need a permanent ban on fracking in the Delaware River Basin.
Thank you very much. As I let the candidates gather their thoughts for their closing statements of 2 minutes each, let me just say again what an honor it is to have them and how appreciative we should all be that they offer themselves to the voters, that they put themselves through the rigor of this campaign. They did this all last night. They had a debate last night in Bensalem. They're here today. They have so many personal engagements each day. If you've ever driven to Quakertown or Percy, you know it's a big county, and people like to see you. They like to see the candidate come to their town, and so they put in enormous hours, miles, and everything else. So why don't you join with me now in thanking them and And again, by virtue of the coin toss, Mr. Strauss makes his first closing statement.
Yeah, and I also want to thank everyone again, and I know some of you came from far away, but let me just leave you with one more story, and it's a military story, but don't worry, I'm not the hero. In fact, quite the opposite. In 2000, it was my second trip over to Afghanistan, and we were doing a patrol along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. It was winter, we were at altitude, I was carrying over 100 pounds. And about 6 kilometers into a 10-kilometer movement, I got a leg cramp, and I know it sounds ridiculous, but it was so bad I literally couldn't bend my leg. And I tried to work through it, and I couldn't, and I went down, and I left our platoon exposed because we're on the side of this mountain. They rallied around me, they got me back up on my feet, they helped me work it out. And we got the job done that day. And that, to me, is what America represents, because every one of us in this room, every one of us watching at home today, at some point in our lives, we're going to need help, because we're going to lose a job and we're going to need some assistance until we find a new one, because we're going to get sick and we're going to need health insurance to pay for our medicine, or we're going to want to go to college and we're going to need a loan to pay for it. That's my America. That is not Mike Fitzpatrick's America. In Mike Fitzpatrick's America, it's harder for you all to go to school because they cut funding from education. These potholes that I mentioned, they're going to get worse because we're not investing in our infrastructure. And instead, we vote for things like sequesters and shutdowns, which helps lead to plant closures in Newtown. So you have potholes, you have power outages, and you have plant closures. That's Mike Fitzpatrick's vision of America. Mine's a little different. In my America, I will invest in you, the students, so that everyone has access to quality, affordable education. I'll make sure that every worker gets paid a livable wage so that they have the same kind of opportunity that my grandfather and my mother had. And finally, I'll invest in our infrastructure so that we're the best place on earth, this country, this community, to do business, so we can create jobs and grow the middle class. Now, if those are my principles, I've shown I'm willing to fight for them, and that's what I intend to fight for when I go down to Washington. And I thank you so much for having me here today. It's really been a pleasure to speak with you all.
You can clap for that.
Thank you, Bill and Kevin, for the spirited debate, and thank you all for coming out. It was great to have this opportunity. I'd like to close much like how I began, and elections are about contrasts. and I present a stark contrast to Mike Fitzpatrick and his politics as usual. Mike Fitzpatrick doesn't want to face me in this race because I know this district as well as he does. He doesn't want to face me in this race because I present a clear contrast to him and his politics as usual. And he doesn't want to face me in this race because I will hold him to his record. I will hold him to his record of voting to privatize Social Security. I will hold him to his record of sponsoring legislation that would redefine rape. And I will hold him to his record of shutting down our federal government. We deserve a strong voice representing us in Washington, someone who will stand up and fight for our shared middle-class values. And that's what I will do. I will fight to protect Social Security, I will fight to protect women's rights, and I will fight to make sure we are putting this country back on the path to middle-class prosperity. And so I thank you, and I ask you for your support.
This is the third time Bucks County Community College has had the honor of sponsoring a congressional debate. We hope you have your commitment from the winter to come back in the fall and debate Congressman Fitzpatrick. Will you come back?
Yes.
Will you come back?
Absolutely, yes.
All right, good. Hear that, Mr. Sell? Let's get busy. Students, please don't sleep through this or any other election. Get yourself registered, tune into the issues, and cast your vote. I have to ask you to allow the candidates to leave the room. They have a press media gathering that they have to attend. And thank you very much to all of you for coming tonight. Thank you. Today. Thank you very much.
Sure. Well, when I read last year in the newspaper that Kevin was for fracking, I was shocked because I don't think people of the 8th would agree with that. And that's a clear distinction. Elections are about contrast. We need to make sure that we are protecting the water and the 15 million people that depend on it in the Delaware River Basin. And it's why I've been very clear and consistent, which I think is important from our electeds or people seeking to be elected, that we clearly state where we stand on issues.
You seem like you're very focused on continuing to make this campaign, even in the primary, about the difference between you and Mike Fitzpatrick. Maybe not so much about the difference between you and Kevin Strauss. Why is that? You brought up his name certainly much more than Kevin did today.
Well, when we're talking about the difference between Democrats and the difference between Democrats and Republicans, there is a clear distinction there. But there is a clear distinction between Kevin and I as well. I mean, he's accepted over $10,000 from fracking executives. I think that's a problem, and I think people should know about it.
And have you taken issue with, there was a question raised about Kevin moving into the district a couple months before running for office. That was a question that the debate moderator asked. Is it an important issue?
I think it's an important issue. I think we need someone who both knows and shares our values. And although I'm all for people becoming Democrats and moving to the 8th district, I think that it is important, especially in the when we're talking about the House of Representatives, that we have someone who clearly represents us.
So again, going into the polls on election day, the differences between yourself and Kevin Strauss, the ban on fracking, what are some other ways you guys are different?
Well, I think it's, again, I'm the only one in this race who has private sector experience. A lot of politicians like to talk about creating jobs and growing the economy when they've never worked in the private sector, have never started a business or had to purchase health plans and the realities that that are involved with that. And I think that that's an important perspective to have. I think it's what it feels like to me is that a lot of Washington has lost touch with where we are and the realities of the struggles facing the middle class in this country. And having someone that clearly represents that is important.
Heard those comments?
No, I mean, I can't remember the exact words in the exchange, but the bottom line is, like, You know, the only point I was trying to make, we're all accountable in government, and you know there are policy decisions that are made, there's intelligence decisions that are made, and people are working hard. And particularly when you're working in the CIA, it can be tough because you're in the shadows. You don't get to defend yourself. But I mean, these are brave Americans. These are people who subsequently, even before that, put their lives on the line to serve and protect this country. I just want to make sure that people understand that.
There was a question asked about, by the debate moderator, about moving into Bucks County only
Absolutely.
a few months before deciding to run for office. Shaughnessy brought that up earlier. Should that be an issue for voters to think about when they go in the polls, that you moved into the area just a couple months before deciding to run?
Well, first, let me just say, I'm happy to answer any questions that voters have about, where I've been and what I've done. And, and I explained why we moved here. We wanted to come back to Pennsylvania. We wanted to be close to family. In fact, my aunt showed up today, surprised me. So it was nice to see her. But I mean, ultimately for us, it was first and foremost a family decision. Where's the best place to raise our kids? And we wanted that family support network. Anyone who's got little kids knows that it's critically important to have that kind of support network in the area. But in terms of what voters should ask, well, again, I just remind them, just let me tell you where I was. I wasn't off making millions of dollars. I was off serving this country. And I'm certainly not going to apologize for doing that. And I would encourage anyone to consider getting involved in government service, whether it's through the military, whether it's as an elected official, if they're that crazy, but also just serving the country in general. I mean, Peace Corps, there's a lot of opportunities there. So if anything, I think it makes me a well-rounded candidate. I've been out there, I've seen the world, I'm familiar with foreign policy, and I've had to work on really tough foreign policy issues and other policy issues under very stressful circumstances. And having that kind of experience is going to be critical when you go down to Congress.
Kevin, you've had two debates. It seemed like the primary focus of these debates was to explain to voters how you're different from Shaughnessy Norton. So when they go into the polls or during the primary, they can make an informed decision about which candidate, if they're a Democrat, to support. So how are you different from Shaughnessy Norton?
Well, look, here's what and we talked about this last night. And what I'd point to is my experience. And first is, I mentioned I've put country ahead of myself. I have served as a veteran, in the Army. I've served as a CIA officer, and I was proud to do that. So I've shown that I have the skills and experience where I'm willing to have some political courage, where I'm willing to take the vote that I know is in the best interest of this community and of this country. And that's missing from Congress right now. And I think having that policy experience, having those understanding of the nuance of policy making, knowing how government works, it'd be critically important when you get down to Congress, wanting to get off on the right foot as a first-term congressman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other differences between you and her? I mean, they talked about fracking a little bit. Are you for fracking? Can you talk about that?
Right, and I talked about this. Should I be looking at the camera, by the way? Okay. And I talked about this issue when, during the debate, and I wanted to take it head on. And the truth is, there's very minimal differences here, unless she's calling for a ban everywhere. But if we're going to say no fracking in the Delaware River, well, apparently it's fine to have it. Apparently she's saying it's fine to have it in the Susquehanna. So what I've talked about instead is moving away from fossil fuels and moving more towards investment in green energy, because we can grow our economy and we can do it in a clean way. So if we make the investment cycle with green energy the same as we do with hydrocarbons in this country, first of all, we can create jobs, and we can do it in a much cleaner way than we're doing it now.
So just at the federal level, where do you stand on fracking and mining for natural gas? I mean, do you support a ban nationwide? Or?
No, I don't. Here's what we need to do, and here's what I would plan to work on when I got down to Congress. First is you remove the Halliburton loophole. You bring natural gas extraction under the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, and the Safe Drinking Water Act. And those are good places to start. Now, for something like green energy, it's a capital-intensive sector, so I do believe in public financing of it. And those are the sort of things, because I think long-term that's going to be more important. That's why I told that story about the military, because they recognized this was people's lives at stake. And I don't want a country growing up where we're still dependent on foreign oil, because I don't want my kids going to war like I did to fight over oil.
That was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
All right, I think we're good. I do have a better sense about the candidates and how they're different. I don't quite know which one I'm going to vote for yet, just for the simple fact that this is a very brief introduction to them. So I'd like to do more research into both candidates, but I do like a lot of the things they had to say. Some of the issues they touched on important to me are, of course, with education and hiring minimum wage. I love the fire that Shaughnessy seems to have, and I also like the fact that Strauss seems to be a candidate who has a plan. So I love both of them, and it would be great to have a Democrat in there. So I enjoyed it, and I did learn a lot.